You're not going to believe this, but my sister literally stole the cash I'd been saving for my wedding. The ring, the venue deposit, everything. I found out a week before my rehearsal when her emergency suddenly matched the exact amount I'd been missing. Everyone told me to be the bigger person, to keep it in the family, but I'd already lost too much to their excuses. So instead of a scene, I planned one. The kind of revenge that would make her wedding the most unforgettable day of her life, for all the wrong reasons. Growing up in my family meant learning how to disappear your needs beneath everyone else's drama. My parents were the kind who wore sacrifice like a badge, stories about the mortgage, the late nights at work, the things they gave up so we could have better lives. And yet, the one constant I noticed was how those stories always had selective memory. When it came to my sister, Rachel, the rules changed. She was allowed hairline cracks and responsibility. I was expected to be the scaffolding. I'm not rich, and I never pretended to be. I have a steady job, a modest apartment, and a gut-level belief that if you save and plan, you can make things happen. That belief is what kept me awake late nights counting bills and clipping coupons. It's what made me tuck cash into an envelope every month, small sacrifices for a day I was supposed to remember as one of the best in my life. The venue deposit, the photographer retainer, the dress, it all added up to something I'd had to claw for. For me, that envelope wasn't just money. It was proof that I could build something that was mine. Rachel, by contrast, floated through life on a different current. She had charm, an uncanny ability to make our parents feel needed, and a way of turning every crisis into an opportunity for them to swoop in. When bills piled up or creditors called, she'd spin a story about a sudden job loss or an unexpected emergency, and my parents would fold. They called it helping family. I called it enabling. Over the years, I'd lent her cash for car repairs and moved apartments so she could stay with me for a little while. Most of those debts blurred into the fog of family favors. Only the memory of running out of cash at the worst possible moment stuck with me. So when the wedding conversation started, me saving, planning, trying to keep dreams within budget, I expected the usual chorus, encouraging words paired with sideways judgments. But the moment when my father said, "Maybe you should wait until you're more secure," it felt different. It felt like the old familiar control wrapped in a new sting. I tightened my belt and kept saving anyway, envisioning a day that would belong solely to me and the person I loved. The day before rehearsal, when the caterer called for the final payment, I reached for that envelope and felt my stomach drop. The cash was lighter by the exact amount Rachel had somehow borrowed recently. It wasn't just coincidence. It was a pattern, the way she asked, the way my parents responded, the way the whole house shifted into protective mode for her while I was supposed to swallow the loss and smile. That moment made me see the whole story in sharp relief. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a pattern of taking advantage, a system where my saving and responsibility became the family's safety net. I could have swallowed it, pretended nothing happened. I could have let them rewrite the narrative and called it mercy. But something inside me had finally run dry. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wedding meant more than vows and flowers. It was a test, whether I would let myself be erased into the background of everyone else's comfort, or whether I would push back and claim what I'd built. That decision didn't come from a place of spite. It came from exhaustion and clarity, the quiet understanding that some things, once taken, don't come back unless you fight for them. And the plan I sketched that night was about setting the record straight in public, where no one could later spin it into misunderstanding. It was about making sure the wedding I'd worked for didn't vanish into someone else's weekend getaway. I noticed it because of the envelope. I'd been careful, stashing cash in a small, inconspicuous place in my bedroom for months, cutting back on nights out and lunches, skipping the impulse buys. Also, I could scrape together the final payment for the venue and the deposit for the dress. It felt like every dollar I set aside was another plank in the platform I was building for my wedding. On payday, I'd slide the envelope back into the drawer and tell myself it was only temporary. The week before rehearsal, when the caterer called asking for the remaining balance, I reached for that envelope and felt the exact same hollow drop in my gut I'd felt the day my first real relationship ended. The envelope was lighter. My hand started to shake before I even opened it. The amount missing matched, down to the last dollar, what my sister had needed for her own emergency that she'd texted Dad about 2 months earlier. I confronted her the next morning. Her face was a study in practiced innocence, soft, hurt, the look that always worked on Mom. "I just borrowed it," she said, with that casual shrug that made everything sound like a temporary inconvenience. "I thought I'd pay you back. I'm so sorry." Her voice had the precise cadence of someone who'd been forgiven before. I asked Dad in front of her if he'd seen anything, if she'd talked to him about it. He blinked, looked uncomfortable, and said, "She mentioned something about bills, but I didn't realize." He trailed off and then, with that same old family reflex, turned it on me. "But you know how tight things are. Maybe you could cover it, and we'll all sort it out." Like I was the natural bank account, like my savings were an inexhaustible resource. Emily told me not to make a scene, to handle it quietly. "It's your sister," she said. "You can't burn the family down over this." The thing was, they'd been burning me down for years. Every time I tried to set a boundary, 100 small manipulations and guilt trips rolled in. "We did so much for you. Family comes first. Think of your mother." They had turned my generosity into a leash. So I did what I'd done every time they pushed me. I paused, collected evidence, kept receipts, printed screenshots of suspicious transfers. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I watched how they protected her when she needed it, and how quickly the narrative switched to, "We're all family. We help." I let the pattern repeat itself until I had enough of it mapped, every instance like strokes on a blueprint of manipulation. When the rehearsal invitation arrived in my inbox, her wedding scheduled a month after mine, same venue. Inexplicably, my stomach dropped. They'd taken my savings and then booked the hall. The irony stung like salt. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down a plan. Not a melodramatic revenge, no sabotaging the cake or obvious public humiliation, but something that would make them feel the exact same hollow I felt when I opened that empty envelope. Something surgical, undeniable, public enough that the story couldn't be rewritten later as misunderstanding. A plan that would not only expose her theft, but reveal the system of excuses that protected her. I folded the paper and slid it into my wallet. Tomorrow, I reminded myself, there would be no impulsive reactions. There would be setup, timing, witnesses, and a moment at her wedding when all the smiles and congratulations would pause and look toward me. Because theft isn't a family matter when it's done to you. Not that way. And I wasn't going to be the quiet punchline anymore. Once the shock wore off, clarity set in. If I'd learned anything from years of being the responsible one, it was that my parents and Rachel thrived on rewriting history. They'd done it so many times, turning her reckless spending into bad luck, turning my resistance into selfishness. If I didn't prepare, they'd twist this theft into another story where I was the villain. So I started collecting evidence. The first thing I did was go through Rachel's social media. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. Shopping bags from designer stores, brunch selfies with champagne, a post from Miami with the caption, "Treat yourself. You deserve it." Each picture had a timestamp that lined up perfectly with the period my money had gone missing. I screenshotted everything, printed it out, and tucked it into a neat folder. Next, I went to the bank. I requested a copy of the withdrawal slips for the account I used to store some of the cash. I had learned the hard way that even small family loans never stayed small. Seeing her signature on a withdrawal slip she wasn't authorized to touch sent a chill through me, but it also hardened my resolve. This wasn't carelessness. This was theft. The last piece was the caterer. I called them and asked if they could hold off on finalizing my payment for another week. The woman on the phone was sympathetic. "We've seen it all," she said. "Take your time. We'll keep your spot reserved." It gave me breathing room. Time to plan something sharper than yelling across the dinner table. Emily was hesitant when I told her. "Do you really want to do this at her wedding?" she asked. "It's going to be ugly." I looked her in the eye. That's the point. They count on privacy. They count on the fact that family fights stay behind closed doors. But if I don't drag this into the light, I'll be paying for it the rest of my life. Daniel, my brother, surprised me by offering help. He'd been quiet through most of the drama over the years, always choosing the path of least resistance. But when I showed him the folder, his jaw tightened. "I've covered for her too," he admitted. "She borrowed from me once and told Mom it was a gift. I never said anything because I didn't want to start a war. But maybe it's time someone did." That night, we sat at my kitchen table, the evidence spread between us. We weren't plotting destruction. We were planning precision. The goal wasn't to ruin her life. It was to stop her from ruining mine. I didn't want revenge in the form of broken glass or screaming matches. I wanted something undeniable, something that would silence every excuse before it left their mouths. And the perfect opportunity was already in front of me. Her wedding. If Rachel wanted a stage, I was going to use it. Planning it felt ridiculous and terrible at the same time, like plotting a minor act of war in the middle of a family celebration. But I kept reminding myself, I wasn't trying to humiliate for pleasure. I was trying to make the truth impossible to gloss over. First, timing. I watched the itinerary of their week. Rehearsal, family photos, the ceremony at 3 p.m., cocktail hour at 4:30, dinner at 6. The moment everything would slow down and eyes would scan the room would be after the speeches, when people are listening and thinking and the bride is basking in congratulations. That's when I wanted the record to be opened. Next, the witnesses. Public spectacle works because it invites witnesses who can't be gaslit later. I told Daniel and Emily to be ready. Sit where they could be seen, but not so close I'd ruin the photos. I quietly reached out to a couple of relatives I trusted, Aunt Lisa and one of my cousins, explaining the situation in as few words as possible. They agreed they'd back me up if I pulled the thread. Having them on my side meant even the family spin machine would find it harder to rewind. Then logistics. I arranged for the caterer contact to leave the final balance email on the table where the planner would see it, like a breadcrumb that tied the missing cash to their booking. I also produced copies of the withdrawal slips and Rachel's social screenshots, printed and bound in a slim folder, all labeled and dated. I didn't want to handle paperwork in the moment. I wanted clarity. I wanted a neat, unarguable package. I practiced what I would say, short, calm, precise. No yelling. No theatrics. Bring out the facts, hand over the documents, ask one simple question, then let the room speak. I knew theatrics could make me look vindictive. Facts make lawyers nod and relatives shift uncomfortably. There was one moral thorn I couldn't shake. This would hurt a lot of people besides Rachel, my parents, mostly, and perhaps fracture relationships for good. I slept on that a dozen times. Each morning the decision hardened. The alternative was letting them preserve their mythology and me keep swallowing the losses. That wasn't living. It was erasing myself slowly. On the morning of the wedding, I kept my movements deliberate and boring. I didn't give speeches or make a scene. I arrived as if I were a guest who wanted to be present for family. Daniel and Emily slipped the folder into my jacket. Aunt Lisa gave me a look, a mixture of apology and gratitude. My hands were steady. When Rachel came down the aisle, she was radiant, exactly the way she always wanted to be perceived, flawless, adored, untouchable. I felt the old ache, but under it a new, cold clarity. The radiance was built with my money. For a second, the room blurred, flowers, vows, the scraping of chairs, and then everything snapped into place. I waited for the speeches, for the toasts, for the moment when the crowd's attention condensed like a lens. When it did, I would step in. I would not shout. I would not curse. I would show them the receipt of the life they'd paid for with my savings. And then I would watch what happened when the people who'd always gotten away with rewriting history saw the original pages for the first time. The speeches started lighthearted. Rachel's maid of honor made everyone laugh with stories about college nights out. The best man told a few jokes that made my father wheeze with pride. The clinking of glasses, the polite applause, the glances of guests checking their watches. It was all the rhythm of a typical wedding reception. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, steady but hard, like a drumbeat before a fight. My folder sat on the chair beside me, thin but heavy with meaning. I caught Daniel's eye across the table. He gave me the smallest nod, as if to say, now or never. Then came my father's turn. He stood, adjusted his tie, and launched into a speech about family, about loyalty, about how proud he was to see his daughter build something beautiful from the ground up. Every word tasted like acid. He knew, Rachel knew, I knew. And yet the lies kept flowing, smooth and easy. I waited until the applause faded. My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I stood. Heads turned. Emily's hand brushed mine, a silent "You've got this." "I'd like to say something," I said. My voice was calm, louder than I expected. Not as a toast, as a truth. The room hushed. Rachel's smile froze in place, her eyes flicking toward my parents. I stepped to the center, the folder in my hand. A wedding is supposed to be about honesty, commitment, building a future. But what do you do when that future is stolen before it even begins? A murmur rippled through the guests. I opened the folder, sliding out the first page, a bank withdrawal slip. Months ago, I'd been saving for my own wedding. Saving carefully, dollar by dollar. Until my money went missing. I held up the slip. The exact amount that disappeared? The exact amount Rachel suddenly had for her emergency. Gasps. Shifting chairs. My mother's face went pale. I laid down the next set of pages, screenshots of Rachel's vacations, the shopping bags, the cocktails. This wasn't survival. This wasn't bad luck. This was indulgence, funded by what she stole from me. And instead of returning it, instead of owning up to it, she stood here tonight, at a wedding booked with money that didn't belong to her. Rachel shot up, her voice shrill. This is insane. He's lying. Daniel stood too, his voice like steel. He's not lying. I saw the slips. I saw the dates. He has the proof. The guests turned to look at Rachel, their cheers and smiles dissolving into stunned silence. My father tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I took a step back, leaving the folder open on the head table for everyone to see. So before we raise another glass to honesty and family, let's acknowledge the truth. My sister stole from me. And today, the only thing she's built is a wedding on lies. The silence that followed was absolute. A silence heavy enough to shatter everything they had tried to protect. The silence didn't last long. It broke like glass. Whispers swelled into a low roar as people leaned across tables, trading what they'd just seen. Guests clutched their programs, some craning their necks to glimpse the folder left open on the head table. Rachel's face was twisted between fury and panic. "This is not the time," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're ruining my wedding. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice. You ruined mine the moment you took what wasn't yours." That line cut through the noise like a blade. A few gasps, even a laugh from the back, sharp, incredulous. My mother rushed forward, gripping Rachel's arm like she could physically hold her together. "Please sit down," she hissed. Then she turned to the guests with a shaky smile. "This is a misunderstanding. We'll sort it out as a family." But the damage was done. People weren't looking at me like a bitter brother. They were looking at her, at the way her eyes darted, the way her fiancé's face drained of color. "Is it true?" he asked quietly, not to me, but to Rachel. His voice carried enough for the front tables to hear. Rachel stammered, "Of course not. He's twisting things, you know how he is." Daniel cut her off, stepping closer. "Don't you dare. He has the receipts, Rachel, and you know it." The groom's family started shifting uncomfortably, their whispers harder, sharper. I caught the word thief hissed by one of the bridesmaids. My father stood, his face red, veins bulging at his temples. "Enough. This is a wedding, not a trial. You've made your point, son. Sit down before you embarrass us all." I looked him dead in the eye. "Embarrass you? Or embarrass the truth?" He flinched. For the first time, he had no quick retort, no lecture about loyalty or respect. Then came the final blow. The groom himself reached for the folder. He flipped through the pages, his face growing darker with each screenshot, each slip of paper. When he got to the screenshot of Rachel's champagne brunch, the one dated the exact day the money vanished, he slammed the folder shut. "You told me your brother was lying," he said to her, his voice shaking with anger. "You swore this was jealousy. But this is evidence." Rachel grabbed his arm, desperation spilling out. "Baby, please. It was just once. I was going to pay it back." "Just once," he spat. "We're supposed to be starting a life together, and you're stealing from your own brother to fund it? What else have you lied about?" The whispers rose again, now tinged with judgment. A few guests stood, unsure if they should stay. The best man looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. Rachel's perfect image was crumbling right there in her white dress, under the gaze of everyone she'd invited to adore her. And for the first time in years, I felt the scales shift. The weight wasn't on me anymore, it was on her. The reception hall no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, some standing and making their way toward the exits, murmuring excuses about early mornings and babysitters. The clink of cutlery and glasses that usually accompanied a wedding dinner was replaced with the low buzz of scandal. Rachel stood frozen, clutching her bouquet like it was a life raft. Her groom's family wasn't whispering anymore. They were staring, openly, with that unmistakable look of betrayal. His mother shook her head. whispering something sharp into his ear that made him recoil even further from Rachel's touch. My mother tried to rally. She stood, hands trembling, her voice pitched high with forced calm. Everyone, please. Weddings can be stressful, emotions run high. This isn't. But she was drowned out by a cousin in the back who muttered, not quietly enough, stressful? This is theft. The word spread like wildfire. Theft. Thief. It carried on whispers from one table to the next until it was the only word anyone seemed to hear. My father, red-faced and shaking, turned on me. You had no right to do this here. None. You've shamed your sister. You've shamed this family. No. I interrupted, my voice calm, deliberate. I've freed myself from being your scapegoat. You've all hidden her behavior for years. You've made excuses. Tonight, you can't. Not with the evidence in front of everyone. The groom snapped the folder shut and shoved it back across the table. This marriage is over. I won't marry a liar who steals from her own brother. His words cut through the room like thunder. Rachel's knees buckled. She grabbed a chair to steady herself. Please, she begged, reaching for him. We can fix this. It was a mistake. His voice was cold. A mistake is spilling wine on a dress. This is fraud. This is betrayal. And you thought you'd get away with it. Guests began filing out faster now, muttering, shaking their heads. The bridesmaids hovered awkwardly, unsure whether to comfort her or follow the crowd. The DJ, who had been quietly standing by, shut off the music mid-track, leaving the hall in tense silence. My father tried one last time, his voice booming. This family doesn't air its dirty laundry in public. You've humiliated us. I finally turned to face him fully. No. You humiliated yourselves by letting her steal from me, and then pretending it was normal. Tonight isn't about dirty laundry, it's about truth. And truth doesn't stay hidden forever. For once, there was no comeback. No lecture. Just his silence, his chest heaving as the reality sank in. Rachel collapsed into a chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, clutching her ruined bouquet. The groom walked out with his family, their backs rigid, their faces hard. And in that moment, under the gaze of everyone still left in the room, I realized something. This wasn't just the collapse of her wedding. It was the collapse of their entire illusion. The days after the wedding felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, more like the silence after a storm has torn through. When you walk outside and see the wreckage scattered everywhere. My phone buzzed nonstop at first. Half the family furious, the other half whispering that I'd done the right thing. Aunt Lisa called to tell me people were still talking about it in hushed tones at church, like it was some kind of morality play. Cousins sent texts that read like confessions. She borrowed from me too. I always knew something was off, but I didn't want to get involved. Rachel didn't call. Not once. The only sign of life from her was a series of angry posts on social media about fake people who ruin happiness. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The likes on her posts were fewer than usual, the comments colder, more skeptical. Her glow, her shield of charm, was cracking. My parents, though, didn't stay silent. My father left me a voicemail so furious he could barely string words together. Lots of talk about betrayal, about family loyalty, about how I'd destroyed your sister's future. My mother's messages were more desperate, alternating between pleading and scolding. We can fix this if you just apologize. You didn't have to humiliate her. What will people think of our family now? Each time, I deleted the messages without responding. I'd spent years answering, explaining, defending. This time, silence was my answer. Emily noticed the change in me. She said I looked lighter, like a weight had been lifted. And she was right. For the first time, I wasn't carrying their lies on my back. For the first time, they were the ones forced to stumble under the truth. Daniel came by a few nights later. He brought a six-pack and sat at my kitchen table, quiet for a long time before saying, "You know, I always envied you. You stood up. I never did. You backed me up when it counted." I reminded him. "Yeah," he said, staring into his beer. "But I should have done it years ago." We didn't need more words. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was companionable. Word filtered back to me slowly. The groom's family had pulled out completely, canceled the honeymoon, cut ties. Vendors demanded payments that Rachel and my parents couldn't cover without the deposit they'd stolen. Their perfect wedding had become a financial sinkhole, an open wound they couldn't close with a smile. And me? I slept better. Not because I'd ruined her wedding. I hadn't set out to burn it all down. but because I had finally set boundaries no one could ignore. For the first time in years, I felt like my life belonged to me again. It took a week before my parents showed up at my door. I half expected it, half dreaded it. When I opened the door, they stood there like they had rehearsed their expressions. My mother with her pleading eyes, my father with his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. I didn't invite them in right away. For once, I wanted them to feel the imbalance, the awkward weight of standing on my threshold, waiting for my permission. Eventually, I stepped aside. We sat at the table, the same table where I had counted the money in that envelope months ago. My father started immediately. Do you realize what you've done? You've humiliated us in front of everyone. Your sister may never recover from this. I leaned back, arms crossed. Recover from what? From stealing? From lying? Or from finally facing the consequences? My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. She made a mistake, but family doesn't air things out in public. You could have handled this privately. I shook my head. Privately is how you've kept enabling her. Privately is why she thought she could take thousands of dollars and still walk down the aisle like a princess. You didn't want it private for her sake. You wanted it private so you could all keep pretending. The words landed heavier than I expected. My mother looked away. My father, though, wasn't finished. You've ruined your own reputation too. People will remember you as the man who destroyed his sister's wedding. I laughed bitterly. Good. Let them remember. Because they'll also remember why. They'll remember she built that wedding on stolen money. If you think the truth makes me look bad, maybe you need to rethink what you're defending. Silence stretched between us. My father's eyes darted toward my mother, as if searching for backup, but she stayed quiet, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice low, steady. I am done. Done being the safety net. Done carrying the shame. Done letting you rewrite every story to make Rachel the victim and me the villain. You want to fix this? Start by holding her accountable. Start by holding yourselves accountable. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't budge. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight had drained out of him. They had no leverage anymore. When they finally left, the air in my apartment felt lighter, like a storm had finally passed. For years, I had dreaded confrontations with them, bracing myself for guilt trips and manipulation. But this time, they had walked away defeated, and I hadn't raised my voice once. I closed the door behind them and stood in the quiet, realizing something profound. I wasn't just free of Rachel's theft. I was free of their control. The weeks stretched into months, and the shockwaves from that wedding never really settled. My parents stopped calling as often. When they did, the tone was clipped, polite, like they were speaking to a distant relative instead of their son. Rachel went radio silent, except for the occasional cryptic social media post about toxic people and betrayal. Her audience had dwindled, fewer likes, fewer sympathetic comments. The shine she'd always relied on was gone. Word traveled through the family like gossip always does. An uncle pulled me aside at a barbecue and said quietly, "You did what needed to be done. She's been skating by for years." Cousins who once avoided conflict began sharing their own stories of being used. It was like Rachel's collapse had opened a door no one dared touch before. People weren't scared to say the truth anymore. The financial wreckage was worse than even I imagined. The groom's family not only walked away, but they demanded their contributions back. Gifts, deposits, everything. Vendors hounded my parents, who couldn't cover the bills without taking out another loan. The wedding of the year became the scandal of the neighborhood. For once, the whispers weren't about me. They were about them. And me? I kept living. I paid the caterer for my own wedding on my own terms. Emily and I talked about what kind of ceremony we wanted, one that wasn't about appearances or big stages. Something real, something ours. We laughed at the idea of drama at the altar because the drama was already behind us. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far, if maybe exposing her in front of everyone was too sharp a blade. But then I'd remember the hollow feeling of that empty envelope, the years of guilt trips, the way my parents twisted reality until I doubted my own memory. And I'd realize I hadn't gone too far. I'd finally gone far enough. The strangest part was how quiet my life felt without the constant background noise of being the family scapegoat. For the first time, decisions felt like mine. My money was mine. My future was mine. The freedom was almost unsettling in its simplicity. Rachel's life unraveled in slow motion. Her engagement dissolved. She moved back in with my parents. Jobs came and went. The girl who had always strutted through life with safety nets beneath her was suddenly face to face with gravity. I didn't celebrate her downfall, but I also didn't rescue her. That was the difference now. Looking back, I realized the wedding wasn't just the collapse of her big day. It was the end of a family script that had been running for years. They couldn't cast me as the responsible fool anymore, not when the truth had been broadcast so publicly. The role was gone, and so was their control. And in that space, I finally found something I didn't know I was missing: peace. Months later, I found myself sitting in the same kitchen where it had all started, the place where I used to hide that envelope, where I used to count bills with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. But the feeling was different now. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt mine. Emily slid a mug of coffee across the table. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. She didn't mean the money. She meant the choice, the reveal, the fallout, the scorched earth of what was once my family's picture-perfect image. I thought about it. The screaming at the reception. Rachel's mascara streaked down her cheeks. My parents' furious voicemails. The fractured family dinners that followed. There were moments when it felt like I'd set off a bomb. But the truth? The only thing that exploded was an illusion that needed to die a long time ago. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. For once, I didn't let them rewrite the story." Emily smiled, reaching for my hand. That was all she needed to hear. Life didn't suddenly become a fairy tale. Rachel was still bitter, my parents still distant, and the old habits of guilt and manipulation still tried to creep back through small gestures. But the difference now was me. I didn't bend. I didn't explain. I didn't let their version of reality override mine. The folder with the evidence still sat in my desk drawer, not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of something vital. Proof matters. Boundaries matter. And sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to drag the truth into the light, no matter how ugly it looks under scrutiny. People still whispered about that wedding. Some called me cruel, others called me brave. The truth is probably somewhere in between. I wasn't out to destroy Rachel. I was out to stop her from destroying me. If collateral damage followed, that wasn't on me. That was on the choices she made, the lies my parents defended, the years of silence they demanded. The wedding that never really happened became a turning point in my life. Not because I embarrassed my sister, but because I finally cut the cord that had kept me tied to their control. I stopped being the family's safety net. I stopped being their scapegoat. And I started being my own person. I don't know if Rachel will ever pay me back. I don't know if my parents will ever forgive me. But I do know this. I'm done apologizing for telling the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real revenge. In the end, my sister didn't just lose a wedding. She lost the safety net that had carried her for years. My parents, for once, couldn't smooth it over with excuses or guilt trips. The truth was too public, too undeniable. And me? I gained something much bigger than money. I gained freedom. It's strange how one moment, opening an empty envelope, standing up in a crowded hall, laying down a folder of evidence, can change everything. For years, I thought family loyalty meant silence, sacrifice, and swallowing pain. But real loyalty doesn't come from being used. It comes from respect. I walked away lighter. Not because I'd humiliated her, but because I'd finally stopped letting their version of the story erase mine. That wedding became infamous in our family. But for me, it was the day I stopped being their scapegoat and started being my own person.